Hello everyone and welcome to a new lesson. I hope you really enjoyed learning about people in the past and how people impacted history and affected our lives today and the many lives of black people who were in danger and suffering and enslaved back in history. I hope that you really learned something about Rosa Parks and about Martin Luther. And we still have two more people that I want to talk about. One is Frederick Douglass for today, and tomorrow I will teach you about another person, and both of them really impacted or affected our lives today. Of course, there are many other people in history who really stood up for the civil rights of black people, but because we don't have much time, I will just give you two more people, and I can give you a list of the other people, and you can do a research and tell me more about them. So let's watch this short video about Frederick Douglass.
From Myron. Sure thing, Myron. Frederick Douglass was one of the most famous American abolitionists of the 19th century. That means he was an opponent of slavery. Douglass was a brilliant speaker, writer, and activist. His words were extra powerful because he'd experienced the horrors of slavery firsthand. Yep, Frederick Douglass was born a slave in Maryland around 1818. He was separated from his mother right after he was born, and he never knew who his father was. He wasn't even allowed to know his own age. As a boy, Douglass suffered from cold and hunger, and he saw friends and family whipped by plantation owners. But he got lucky. Well, as lucky as a slave could get. He was sold to a family in Baltimore that wasn't quite so cruel. The wife even taught Douglass how to read and write, at least until her husband put a stop to it. Back then, it was against the law to teach slaves to read. Slave owners thought that books could give their slaves dangerous ideas about freedom, and in Douglass's case, they were right. Even though he was still a boy, Douglass realized that he could escape from slavery and be free. So he continued his education in secret, planning to flee to the north as soon as he could. Nope, Douglass had to endure years of hardship before he escaped. But in 1838, he disguised himself as a sailor and made it to freedom. He and his wife settled in Massachusetts, where they met a man named William Lloyd Garrison. Garrison was one of the leading abolitionists of the day, and he published a popular anti-slavery newspaper. In 1843, Garrison invited Douglass to speak at an abolitionist meeting. Douglass decided to give it a go. He amazed the crowd with a passionate retelling of his life story. It was such a success that Douglass began lecturing throughout the free parts of the United States. He even traveled abroad and spoke to packed houses in Britain and Ireland. 2 years later, he published his first book, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, which is today considered a literary classic. Yeah, I know you've read it. You copied out the whole thing. Anyway, the book became a bestseller in both America and Europe. The first-person prose gave readers a direct experience of Douglass's story. Many had never before considered America's slaves as human beings capable of suffering. Overnight, Douglass became a leading abolitionist spokesman. He began his own anti-slavery newspaper, the North Star. He also supported the brand new women's rights movement and Ireland's right to be free of British rule.
So if I ask you what did Frederick Douglass do, you can tell me that he started his own newspaper, he voted for women, he fought for the enslavement of black people, he was a writer, he was a speaker.
That's right, Douglass was friends with Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln was the president of America at that time. So imagine Frederick, a slave, becoming friends with the president just because he was a very good speaker.
Civil War, Douglass called for African American troops to be admitted to the all-white Union Army. When they finally were, he and his sons helped recruit soldiers for the first all-black regiment since the Revolutionary War.
So imagine back then, the army only used to have white people. So Frederick actually fought, and because of him, black people could join the army.
But Douglass got angry when he he found out they were paid less than whites. So in 1863, he told Lincoln about it personally. It was the first time an African American met with the president at the White House. The two remained in touch for the rest of Lincoln's presidency. Well, after the Civil War, Douglas continued to lecture, write, and publish newspapers. He also held a bunch of official government positions like Marshal of Washington, D.C., and Consul General to the country of Haiti. Well, no, he died in 1895, so I guess he couldn't sue you for copying his book. But you still shouldn't do it. I mean, plagiarism is wrong. Oh boy. Man, they'll publish anything these days.
Okay, so let us read this story together because you have this for your homework. So let's read the instruction first of all. It says read the passage 3 times, okay, to practice fluency. Fluency, it means when you speak well and speak loud and speak quickly. Then complete the show what you know comprehension tasks and the response question. So we have to read it 3 times. For today, I will just read it 1 time with you, but you are supposed to read it 3 times by yourself, okay? Okay, let me make this bigger. Okay, please put your finger on your paper and follow with me. One of the most famous people in the anti-slavery movement was Frederick Douglass. In his lifetime, he was enslaved. Enslaved means that he was a slave, كان عبد. Then became a civil rights activist and writer. So كان عم بيحارب أو كان عم he was fighting for الحقوق الإنسانية وكمان كان كاتب. Frederick Douglass was born on a plantation in Maryland. Plantation, it means a big land where they plant vegetation or vegetables and they sell it. His mother was enslaved, so he was born into slavery. He grew up away from his mother because, as you remember in the video, he was taken away from his mom when he was just a very small baby. He moved around to different slave owners because different slave owners would buy the black people and they would put them here and there and buy again and sell. So he was everywhere, working in the land, in the plantation. He had a hard childhood. Children born into slavery were not allowed to go to school. They were not allowed to learn how to read and write. One of Frederick's slave owners had a wife who started to teach him how to read. The slave owner found out and he made her stop teaching him. He said that Frederick should not know how to read. And we know from the video why they didn't let them read, why they didn't let them learn how to read and write. What did the video say? Do you remember? They said that black people were not supposed to learn how to read and write because they didn't want them to dream about freedom and to read about freedom and to take these ideas about freedom. So reading and writing was only for white people. Frederick Douglass loved to learn. He wanted to learn more. And as we saw in the video and as we read here, there was one woman who taught him how to read and write. And when her husband found out, he told her no, he's not supposed to read and write. So he didn't let her teach him anymore. So let's continue. Frederick Douglass loved to read. He wanted to learn more, so he worked on ways to learn to read and write. He spent a lot of time studying and practicing. Soon, he knew how to read and write, and he taught others too. As Frederick Douglass got older, he focused more and more on gaining freedom. الحرية. Freedom is the power to do what you want to do. People who were enslaved had a very difficult life. They did not have rights. ما كان عندهم حقوق. This meant the owners could treat them in terrible ways. He thought of ways to escape from slavery. Finally, he did it. He pretended to be a sailor and carried papers that showed he was a free black person. He escaped to New York City. This was very risky. Risky, it means it was very scary and dangerous. When Frederick Douglass lived in New York, his life was still not easy. So New York was in the north, remember? Because in the south there were the slaves, but in the north they were free. He worked with other people to end slavery. So here is where he started to visit the president, he started to write books, he started to give speeches. So let's continue. He told stories about when he was enslaved. He wrote stories about his experience. This made other people want to end slavery too. Frederick Douglass believed in equal rights. He believed that everyone should be free and treated fairly. He worked hard to help make things better for people. Okay, what do we learn from Frederick Douglass? So for your homework, I want you to do these 4 questions over here. Use a yellow crayon or colored pencil to highlight or to underline the reason that Frederick Douglass learned to read and write. Why did he learn to read and write? Look at the text and underline. Now use a blue crayon or colored pencil to show the sentence that defines the word freedom. Defines, it means gives the meaning of the word freedom. There's a sentence here that gives us the meaning of freedom. Use a blue crayon and underline this sentence. Number 3. Use a green crayon or colored pencil to highlight how Frederick Douglass escaped from slavery. It can be 1 line, it can be more than 1 line, so you need to underline the sentence that tells us how Frederick Douglass escaped from slavery. How did he go to New York? How did he escape? And here I want you to write this answer. How did Frederick Douglass help other people? Write 1 way on the lines. Okay, you don't have to use these colors, but whatever you have at home, I want you to put here the color in the box so I know where to search and which color to look for. Okay, other than this, I also want you to fill out this paper. So you write the name of the person, so Frederick Douglass over here, the summary of his life, and impact or significance, like what did he do in his life, okay, to help other people, what is so important about him, why is he so famous, and illustration, it means draw his picture, just like we did with Rosa Parks. Okay, your homework, send it tomorrow by 12 maximum.